Welcome to this installment of Anatomy Animations by Bridget Healy, where we're going to study the respiratory system. First, I want you to imagine a straw with two balloons that are attached to the end of this straw. When you blow air into the straw, this causes the air to then travel into each balloon, causing them to inflate. Now, when you suck the air back out of the straw, this causes the air to come from the balloons and then back up the straw, and the balloons then deflate. This is how our lungs work. Now, follow my pointer. This up here is the upper respiratory tract, and this down here is the lower respiratory tract. Can you still see the straw and the balloons? Great! Now hold that thought. We're going to come back to it later. Next, follow my pointer. Right now, we're in the nasal cavity. This is how you can breathe through your nose and have the air travel to your lungs. It first goes to the pharynx and then to the larynx. Now my pointer is in your mouth. This is how you can breathe through your mouth and air can still travel to your lungs. Now, let's look at the lower respiratory tract. Where my pointer is right now is the trachea. This is our straw. The straw then splits similar to how a fork in the road happens into two main bronchus, which lead into the right and left lungs. Now, who's ready to see what's in our nose? The nasal and oral cavities are hollow areas within our head which allow for the air to enter into the body. The nasal cavity contains these large structures called turbinates, which are covered in a slime-like substance called mucus, which warms and filters the air as it enters. The air then travels from either the oral or the nasal cavity to the pharynx, where it then travels down to the larynx. Now, the nasal cavity is made up of these special cells called pseudociliated columnar epithelium. They're arranged in such a way where it looks like there's many layers, but there's really only one. These cells also have a small finger-like projections that are called cilia. Cilia uses the mucus in order to trap pathogens that can be in the air. And then they project those pathogens back up into the mouth. Now, when we get to the pharynx, there's a different kind of cell. This is what is called non-keratinizing stratified squamous epithelium. These kind of cells allow for the back of our throat to stretch, which is really important when we go to swallow foods. Now, let's talk about the trachea, which is the tough tube in our neck made up of hyaline cartilage. It also is lined with the pseudostratified columnar epithelium, which is the really cool cell type that we learned about in our notes. Now, I want you to imagine the trachea, the bronchus, and the bronchioles as a tree trunk, which has a big, thick trunk, and then it splits into these many different branches in the tree. As the tree trunk keeps branching, it gets less of that really dense cartilage and becomes more of this smooth and squishy material called smooth muscle. Now, where my pointer is right now is where the trachea first splits into the primary bronchus, called the carina. Then, the primary bronchus then split again into the secondary bronchi, which then split once more into the tertiary bronchi, creating this network of many branches. Now, when I bet you look at this, you think of a stem and then some grapes. Perfect! That's how I want you to imagine this. Your stems are the conducting zone, where the air just travels through the bronchioles. But then it reaches the grapes, where the respiratory zone is, and this is where gas exchange can happen across these very thin and skinny cells which are in the alveolar sacs. These very skinny cells allow for gases such as oxygen and carbon dioxide to travel across them and then reach the open air. Let's talk about why the respiratory system is important in a healthy person. First, it allows for gases such as oxygen and carbon dioxide be able to enter and leave the body. Oxygen gas, which is produced by trees, is inhaled when we breathe in, and this enters our lungs. Our body then uses the oxygen to do many different cellular functions. Then, when we breathe out, the oxygen has been converted into carbon dioxide in our body, which is then released into the open air. Carbon dioxide is then taken up by the trees, which then converts it back into oxygen for our own use once more. So it's a perfect little cycle. So what can we do in order to keep the respiratory system healthy? First, one of the most important things that we can do is avoid pollution and be able to breathe fresh air, which is so good for our lungs. Next, another thing that we can do is that when we grow up, we don't smoke. Cigarette smoking, as many of you know, is really bad for our lungs and allows for this soot powder to sit on our lungs and make it hard for us to breathe. Another thing we can do is during the colder months, we can take supplements and vitamin gummies like vitamin C, which helps boost our immune system and prevent us from getting respiratory infections. And another thing we can do is stay active. Keep running outside and enjoy being active with your friends and playing tag. This is really good for our respiratory health. Lastly, drinking lots of water is always good for our body, especially our lungs. So what happens when we don't take care of our respiratory system? So it actually puts us at risk for getting many diseases such as the flu or COVID-19. These diseases are caused by a microbe called a virus, which are these very, very spherical looking things that seek to use our body in order to make more of themselves. These respiratory infections can cause us to have many different side effects. One of them is coughing due to fluid being built up between our alveolar sacs. You know, the grapes that we talked about earlier? It can also cause us to have high body temperatures while still making us feel cold. We can feel sore all over our bodies, even though we could be lying in bed without moving. Lastly, it can make it really hard for us to breathe and for our lungs to get the necessary oxygen that we need for us to function. The good news is that we are able to prevent getting these infections as well as spreading them. We can do this by washing our hands, by covering our nose when we sneeze and our mouth when we cough, as well as practicing social distancing. Thank you for watching this segment on Anatomy Animations where we saw the respiratory system. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss any more. Thank you.